cure our aches and pains and discover our own remedies. Our understanding of traditional practices began to grow. Now over 80% of the world's population use traditional medicine. It's also the foundation for many modern medicines and practices. Some 40% of the approved pharmaceutical products in use today come from natural substances like tree barks and plant roots. So why don't national health strategies fully take all this into account? To answer these and other questions, we welcome the World Health Organization's new Global Center for Traditional Medicine. A bold new vision that starts in Jamnagar, Gujarat in India, but has a truly global reach. A center to support evidence and data, sustainability and innovation, bringing together the latest knowledge and technology to advance our understanding of methods already in use by billions of people. Catalyzing ancient wisdom and modern science has never been more needed as we strive towards our global health objectives to keep the world healthy and safe, to serve those in the most vulnerable situations and promote good health and well-being for everyone. Let's take a bold new look at this most ancient and most modern practice. Welcome to WHO's Global Center for Traditional Medicine.
Good evening. It is 7:30 in the evening in India and we are back again with another edition of India at G20. Your daily dose of all the action and analysis of developments taking place under India's G20 presidency in various Indian cities. Today too, action continues in Mumbai and Bengaluru. While in Bengaluru, global economic challenges such as inflation, food and energy insecurity and macroeconomic implications of climate change were deliberated upon, among other economic issues. In Mumbai, the development working meeting focused on key priorities of the global south, including India, such as accelerating progress on the SDGs, lifestyle for environment and data for development. Over the next 30 minutes, we will delve into two key questions. How can G20 finance track work on effective solutions on global taxation, health, financial inclusion and reforms of multilateral banks, and how effective is India's human-centric approach to development? I'm Munmun Bhattacharya. Let's get started with the headlines. First Finance and Central Bank Deputies meeting of G20 Finance Track concludes in Bengaluru over 2 days. Deliberations take place on tackling global economic challenges through international cooperation and food and fuel insecurity. Meeting SDG goals, climate finance, developing resilient cities, international taxation, pandemic prevention, financial inclusion and stability. In an exclusive conversation with DD India, Chief Economic Advisor Ananth Nageshwaran says there is consensus in the G20 inaugural finance track meeting on repurposing multilateral development institutions to meet 21st century challenges such as climate change. Secretary Department of Economic Affairs Ajay Seth stresses on the need for mobilizing more capital from multilateral development banks and private sector to help developing countries meet sustainable development goals and calls for global consensus on cryptocurrency policy approaches and regulation. In an exclusive conversation with DD India, IMF's Deputy Managing Director Geeta Gopinath says, as G20 President, India is playing a key role in ensuring a better debt resolution mechanism to help particularly low-income countries reeling under debt distress. The first G20 Finance and Central Bank Deputies meeting under the Indian presidency was held in Bengaluru under the co-chairship of Secretary Economic Affairs Ajay Seth and RBI's Deputy Governor Dr. Michael Patra. Over the course of 2 days, 7 discussion sessions and 2 side events were organized. The delegates were also given a glimpse of the traditional as well as the contemporary culture of Karnataka through a vivid display of different art forms. Here's a look at the issues that were deliberated upon in Bengaluru.
The core focus of the second day of the finance track meeting of the G20 has been on international banking and taxation system. Besides the core session on international taxation, global health and financial inclusion, officials discussed the reform in multilateral development banks and the need for financing green technology.
There are global public goods, and climate action, climate financing is a very clear area. How to do it? So the phrase which was used, existing capital available with those banks should be made to work harder, use the balance sheet in a much better manner. Views were also expressed that the very business model or the operational model also needs to change. These were designed for previous decades that have served us well. Now things are changing, more technologies are coming, more demands are coming, so operational and business model should also change. Even more capital may be needed.
It was also an opportunity for India to showcase success stories of financial inclusion, technology transformation, digital payments and digital public goods.
Different countries have taken their individual approaches, and so this realization that this is a borderless asset and borderless technology is there. Globally there should be a consensus should be built so that there can be better understanding and better regulations around that. In fact, one of the priorities which have been put on the table, build a consensus for a policy approach to the crypto assets.
Speaking on digital public infrastructure, Ajay Seth said that data architecture has worked well for us and other countries have also adopted it.
Digital public infrastructure in terms of identity, in terms of a fast retail payment system, a very efficient retail system, and the data architecture which has worked well for us. Some other countries have also done so, and if you were to say that we adopted a biometric based Aadhaar but also came out with an open source which was curated in IIITB here in Bengaluru, the MOSHIP, and several countries have adopted that.
Experts believe that India can offer appropriate solutions to the global food and energy crisis, climate finance and crypto regulation. Ajay Mishra, DD News, Bengaluru.
In an exclusive conversation with DD India, Chief Economic Advisor Anant Nageshwaran said that there is consensus in the G20 inaugural finance track meeting on repurposing multilateral development institutions to meet the 21st century challenges such as climate change. He also said that discussions were held on implications of low growth and high inflation on food and energy security. Take a listen.
Sir, global growth has been a major concern. How to make it resilient is a major challenge. So what are the options discussed before?
Oh, I think global growth is something that is not explicitly discussed, but there is clearly a recognition that growth considerations, development considerations will have to be kept in mind, as well as climate change considerations. So to that extent, the G20 is aware that growth is important, and because growth does provide resources for countries to finance themselves, and the implications of lack of growth and also the implications of inflation in terms of food and energy security are discussed in G20.
Sir, finally, on the reform of multilateral agencies, what was the general voice during the discussions?
I think there was a side event also held in the morning about multilateral financing institutions reforms. There is consensus that the multilateral institutions have to be repurposed to finance 21st century challenges such as financing climate change, financing transition to clean energy, etc. And that is what G20 will contribute towards.
And the first working group that you are heading and you are representing India, what are the main focus going to?
I'm not heading, I'm only a co-chair. UK is the other co-chair, and that is a macro framework working group. We will be discussing food and energy security challenges and what are the macroeconomic consequences of climate transition, and also we will discuss about financial globalization, whether capital flows from global finance, how to make global finance a force for greater good, and to make sure ensure that developing countries benefit from financialization rather than getting hindered by it.
Thank you very much, sir, for your time. And there are going to be 40 meetings and 4 ministerial level meetings, and February a meeting of finance minister level and the central bank governor level is going to be very, very crucial from the point of view of a progress made on the finance track. With camera person Kuldeep Sharma, Ajay Mishra, DD News, Bangalore.
The International Monetary Fund feels that India's G20 presidency can help solve the critical issue of food and energy crisis, climate finance and debt crisis in more than 70 low-income countries. Our correspondent Ajay Mishra spoke to Dr. Geeta Gopinath, the second most powerful person in IMF, who was in Bengaluru to participate in the finance track meetings of G20. She also acknowledged that there are serious headwinds to growth in China.
We have with us a very special guest, Dr. Geeta Gopinath, who is first Deputy Managing Director at IMF, the second most powerful person at the Institute. Thanks very much, ma'am. First thing first, your connect with the Mysuru. How are you feeling back in Bangalore?
It's great. I come very often, so I'm always looking forward to visiting India, but Bangalore and my parents live in Mysore, so no, this is always great.
So, what are the expectations from G20 India presidency? Because this is one thing the whole world is eyeing, and you have seen many such events outside India also.
This is a very important year for the world. We're in tough times. There are many global challenges, and there is a great expectation that India, through its presidency, will be able to help with bringing together global cooperation to address some of these issues. So, for instance, when it comes to matters of food security and energy security, this is very important. It's very important for the global south. India is playing a very important role. Debt is very high around the world, and there are many low-income countries that are in debt distress. Again, being able to have a much better debt resolution mechanism is very important, and India is playing a very big role over there. Similarly, when it comes to crypto and crypto regulation, climate finance, there are many big areas, and I think this presidency is critical to accomplishing what we really need for the global economy.
So, India is also advocating the reforms at the multilateral development banks. Where do you see the role of these institutions to help making global economy more resilient in the days to come?
You know, there is a lot of need for the multilateral institutions to be able to deliver finance in a timely manner and at the scale that's required to address the many needs. You know, for instance, at the IMF, we are helping many countries who are facing distress when it comes to external finance to be able to pay for their imports and so on. There are other institutions that are also helping in this regard. So the IMF and the World Bank and other regional financial institutions are all coming together to make sure that we have the necessary financing for the world.
India is one of the fastest growing economy. Your estimate is 6.8%, similar to the estimation of RBI. Recently, World Bank has improved the growth forecast. What is your estimate going forward for India as well as for the global economy?
So for India, in October, we had projected global growth of 6.8% for this fiscal year and 6.1% for the next fiscal year. The data that we have seen coming in is in line with those projections. We will have a new number update in January, but like I said, at this point, they look very much in line with what we had projected. For the global economy, we had global growth slowing from 3.2% this year to 2.7% next year. We're seeing differences in how countries have, in terms of, in some places we're seeing upside surprises to growth, in some places we're seeing downside surprises. China is one area where there are some serious headwinds to growth. I think it's a little early when it comes to global growth to tell you exactly what the number will be. We'll have that in January.
I thank you very much for your precious time, and all the best for the interactions that you are going to have today. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
And joining us for Perspective is Sachin Chaturvedi, economist and DG, Research and Information System for Developing Countries, who is closely associated with India's G20 presidency. Welcome, Professor Chaturvedi. Since you are someone who has his ears to the ground, how close are we to the much-needed reform of the multilateral development banks, particularly blended finance, first loss guarantees, credit enhancement? Because I remember that the Prime Minister had said at the G20 summit in 2015 that the multilateral development banks should enhance their capital base and support the infrastructure needs of developing countries. And it's been 8 years since then almost.
No, absolutely right, Munmun. I think 2 or 3 issues are extremely important. First and foremost for us is to block the spillovers, and that I think is a major challenge before us. How do we equip economies, global management, particularly by multilateral financial institutions to help us manage these spillovers better? If monetary changes, monetary policy challenges in US are making them change the interest rate to some level, which has huge cross-border impact when it comes to the fiscal policy related initiatives of the developing countries. And this monetary and fiscal imbalance across borders is something which is now causing major trouble for several economies. So how we have IFIs which are helping us manage this crisis better. That's point number one. Point number two, of course, as we heard Secretary, Department of Economic Affairs, Dr. Seth speaking in terms of recapitalization, addressing the challenges that are there, both in terms of growth, which is of course important, but also encouraging the multilateral development banks to manage their balance sheet much better. And he suggested that the idea would be to cope up with the climate change related pressures. So there, Munmun, I feel both issues are of great significance. And probably what is much more important is in terms of identifying the priorities which are necessary for this structural adjustment that we are talking of. And that probably is going to happen more in terms of both the World Bank, IMF changes that we are talking of, but also in terms of the regional development banks, whether ADB or AFDB, Afro-American, etc., they would also have to go through this recapitalization process, which is important.
Professor, in the past we've seen that G20 has successfully collaborated on international taxation matters, whether it comes to dealing with tax havens or sharing of tax-related information. What are the challenges in this domain that still remain?
There are a couple of challenges which are still to be addressed by us in terms of the community and also in terms of how we take institutions forward. First and foremost, as you very rightly mentioned, multilateral challenges that are there of the institutions that are there, the sort of refocusing, repurposing of multilateral institutions. Second is definitely in terms of the spillover effects that I mentioned. Third is in terms of the blended finance, private sector and concessional finance, all the three that we are talking, how the presidency should take it forward. In Indonesia's case, we found that Indonesia was extremely keen on blended finance, but there, Munmun, the challenge is that the private sector is not coming forward with the necessary investments that are needed. So blended finance is not going to go very far, and we have seen in the past that it hasn't. So as a result, how do we do what is needed to prod the interests of the people from the private sector? And that, I think, is a major challenge. Global taxation and coordination has been one theme where some achievement has been done. As you might recall, during 2015-16 discussions, India joined the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, which led to the adoption of Sustainable Development Goals. But AA, as it is called, the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, India launched a study group at the UN for tax coordination. But OECD and a couple of other countries have not shown much traction on this. Large havens, large evasion by multinational corporations now are hurting the developed countries themselves. As you would know, EU imposed a huge tax on Google, and that Google tax became a major controversy across, and now all the 5 major IT firms are facing one or the other challenges in OECD bloc itself. So time has come that we do a sincere, serious, honest assessment in terms of how the global taxation and coordination, particularly related to the tax evasion by multinational corporations, is adequately addressed. Also, Murmun, as you would recall, in Indonesia, we established the pandemic preparedness fund, and this I think would come up for its further clearances that are needed, further working of that. If I go back to the multilateral institutions point, I would very much like to add the SDR reforms, the debt, global debt crisis, which are other two issues on the table. SDR reforms, to what extent we should go, is something which is being discussed and is being raised by our partner countries. Debt crisis is something where US President has shown willingness to have a much larger global consensus. Their idea is also to bring Africa on table. And this, I think, would be taken up by the heads of the states in terms of the call to have AU as one of the members of the G20 community, which is a political call. But on the economic front, the debt crisis is something that everybody is concerned with.
So you've given us an overview of the various economic challenges being deliberated upon by the finance track. On the question of cryptocurrency regulation, we see that individual countries have individual approaches. There is surely a lot of scope of coordination here when it comes to policy approaches 2 feet further into regulation, because cryptos are digital assets, they're borderless assets. So perhaps the best way forward is a approach. What do you think?
No, absolutely right, Murmun, because as Secretary DA again said in your interview today, that we are sort of addressing the policy approaches that are needed. So each country has the policy space that they need, and that policy space, I think, is absolutely important. We cannot trust upon any nation in terms of how the challenges are to be managed. The central banks, the governments, they are taking a call, and I think G20 probably is the best platform from that perspective to at least exchange our experiences and see how both institutions which are responsible for monetary policy, which are responsible for fiscal policy, how they converge their views. And I think, as Dr. Seth rightly said, the idea is to have the policy approach that is needed. And that's where a bit of hardening of position, I think, is discernible, though he did not say that, but we can easily guess which countries are pressing for a liberal policy and which countries are actually resisting. So that's where the challenge on crypto assets is going to be there. Indonesia has emerged as one country which has actually imposed taxes on crypto, but that's also de facto recognition of the challenge. And this, I think, India is in no mood to go forward. We would have to see how best we insulate ourselves from this. And this is largely also in terms of how the dimensions that we have introduced in the last budget. Finance Minister talked about the CBDC, and RBI has already implemented that, first among the banks, then now including the non-retail transactions of CBDC. So those details have already been worked out. These two tracks in the finance are going to have their own trajectories as we see both in terms of their wider adoption, but also their regulation and governance.
Right. And on the question of financial inclusion, we heard from India that this is not just about opening bank accounts, this is also about data architecture. This is a lot beyond the simple concept of opening bank accounts. So having said that, the other issues that came up was how to reduce cross-border remittances transaction cost and SME financing in the financial sector regulation space. So what is it that we can expect on these two fronts?
At least on cost of remittances, two things are absolutely clear. One, the trend that is on from 2008 onwards to reduce the transaction cost, which used to be extremely high per dollar transaction, from 11 to 7, we have got it down. Our idea, and as you know, India is one of the biggest economies with the largest a sort of inflow of remittances. Our effort and endeavor is to reduce the cost of transactions processing and also the additional cost that our people bear. So that reduction is extremely important. The second point is how to do that and how do we bring in compatible mechanisms. The UPI and associated architecture is that way limited. So some arrangements that have now evolved with 7 countries is some way our interest is, but our sources
Right.
of transactions, money transfer are
Fair enough.
now from across the world. And if you see the remittances inflow, we need
Yes.
much larger sort of transaction arrangements that are needed. So
Right.
the purpose of reducing the cost of remittances transfer is absolutely important.
Right.
Second is the credit fund that is needed for supporting MSMEs, and this is something where further consolidation is needed.
Right.
In Indonesia, some success has been made, but more is required.
Right, Professor. Thank you so much for your comprehensive answers to a host of questions on finance track meetings in Bengaluru. And now let's go across to Amritpal Singh, our correspondent who's joining us from Mumbai. Amrit, it was day 2 of all the action as far as Development Working Group is concerned. There were 2 meetings on the sidelines yesterday, but the main deliberations as far as Development Working Group started today. What's been the flavor of the day and what is going to be the flavor of the night?
What started today was the Development Working Group held its first meeting, which began this morning with the address by the External Affairs Minister via video link. The Foreign Secretary addressed them via video link. Essentially, this working group's mandate is to look at what sort of development are the G20 countries want to chart out for themselves. The main focus was, of course, on accelerating the progress on the SDGs or the Sustainable Development Goals. As you know that the world has made a missile performance on SDGs. You are way behind targets. Constantly keep revising targets. SDGs in themselves are very open-ended. So this group, what they were trying to do today and what they'll try and do tomorrow is basically chart out the future course of action. What is achievable, what is not achievable, and how new tools can be brought in. For example, data for development, how that can be used, how technological transformation can be used, how other stakeholders who were earlier did not have enough say or were marginalized, like we're talking about women now, women led development. So they're looking at basically redefining what sort of a growth and development they see for themselves, and is it equitable, inclusive, resilient, sustainable, because climate is the biggest issue, one of the biggest issues of our times. So that is what happened through the day. In the flavor of the evening, of course, is when you are in Mumbai, you cannot take Bollywood away. Bollywood is a global brand. So the delegates, the 40 odd organizations and countries which are present here will be given a taste of the Bollywood. So there'll be dances. So the cultural part is the showcasing Bollywood for the delegates who are here. Munmun?
Fair enough. We'll leave it at that, Amrit. Thank you so much for your inputs from Mumbai. So that's Amritpal Singh tracking the day's developments in the Development Working Group meeting in Mumbai. The deliberations are going to continue in Bengaluru and Mumbai over the next few days. So do keep yourselves tuned to DD India for the latest on all the action from G20, and we'll see you again at 7:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time on DD India with a fresh edition of India at the Rate G20. See you there.
big ideas, big dreams, and big achievements. Meet and learn from successful startup founders. Watch Startup Champions 2.0.
ये विशाल है ना, इसका सब प्रॉपर चलता है।
कल उसके बैंक अकाउंट में 15,000 रुपए का फ्रॉड हुआ है, पता है?
इसको तो कोई टेंशन ही नहीं होती है, देखना।
टेंशन क्यों? मेरी कोई गलती ही नहीं थी। फिर भी फ्रॉड होने पर मैंने तुरंत बैंक को इन्फॉर्म कर दिया। आरबीआई कहता है अगर आपके अकाउंट से किसी ने धोखे से पैसे निकाले हैं तो बैंक को जल्द से जल्द इन्फॉर्म कीजिए। 3 दिन के अंदर इन्फॉर्म किया तो कोई नुकसान नहीं होगा। जितना लेट करोगे उतना ज्यादा नुकसान। और सुन, सब चलता नहीं है, प्रॉपर चलाना पड़ता है। आरबीआई कहता है जानकार बनिए, सतर्क रहिए।
You will meet 2 startup champions from the agriculture industry.
Create millions of tons of fruits that come in the country. But very, very important to have automation here so that the farmer can realize a better price.
So what's your business model? How do you make money?
Basically the rates provided by the FPO, the commodity that they are getting, the grade or the quality that they want, and also the quantity.
For the Grammic platform, we charge the farmer basis the transactions that they record on the platform. At the same time, for the agribusinesses that they use FMS, that is FPO management system, they use, you can say that we have freemium type of model wherein we have a costing basis the tonnage that they procure through our platform.
Watch Changemakers on DD India.
As the day unfolds and news and events take shape, we get you complete coverage of every news breaking in, tracking new developments as they happen. Midday Prime English, Monday to Friday, 2 p.m. on DD India. Get in-depth analysis of the important news of the day. Spotlight on day's newsmakers. Expert comments to dissect the news. Get the finer points of the matter. Watch Dateline 5 p.m. on weekdays on DD India.
Hey girls! Hi! Congratulations! आज तो पार्टी चाहिए। पहले चैंपियन के साथ सेल्फी लेंगे।
आइडिया, यही करते हैं पार्टी।
पिज्जा पार्टी। ये चल अपना कार्ड और पिन दे।
मेरे कार्ड की डिटेल्स मैं खुद ही डालूंगी। आरबीआई कहता है अपना पिन, ओटीपी, सीवीवी या इंटरनेट बैंकिंग पासवर्ड किसी के साथ शेयर ना करें। ऑनलाइन बैंकिंग सिर्फ अपने कंप्यूटर, मोबाइल और सिक्योर नेटवर्क से करें।
बाय गर्ल्स, कहाँ जा रही है? सुना नहीं? नो शेयरिंग।
आरबीआई कहता है जानकार बनिए, सतर्क रहिए।
Namaskar and thank you very much for joining us on this special program that focuses on issues related to geoeconomics. India has been looking at ways to boost exports, and it's challenging at a time when the world is facing a recession. So many countries are keen on fast-tracking FTA negotiations with India to gain access to Indian markets. But in doing so, will it help Indian products in their markets which are under economic strain? I'm talking about the markets abroad. Now we'll look at the concept of FTAs and how negotiations will aim at rebalancing trade. So let me introduce you to our guests on the program. They are Ambassador Baswati Mukherjee, is a former senior diplomat who is an expert on issues regarding globalization, and Professor Abhijit Das heads the WTA Center at the Indian Institute of Foreign Trade. Thank you very much, both of you, for being with us. Ambassador Mukherjee, let me start with you. An FTA, in principle, it leads to both trading partners eventually agreeing to reduce or eliminate tariffs and trade barriers for the mutual benefit. But how balanced has India's experience been in FTA negotiations?
Well, you know, Mark, it's such an interesting topic. It all depends on with whom you are negotiating the FTA. Like, for instance, it's taken us a long time, and we haven't quite reached there, to have a what we call a broad-based trade and investment agreement, BTIA, with the European Union, because they are a much more powerful economic bloc than India, and if they don't make some concessions to us, it would be difficult for us to open up completely without getting something in return, because we would then lose much more and they would gain much more.
Yes.
On the other hand, if the FTA is between more or less equally balanced economic partners at more or less the same stage of economic development, it becomes much easier, provided the areas of strength are different. Now, in this particular case, for instance, we're going to talk about the India-UK FTA. Here, the UK economy after Brexit and COVID has not done well. UK actually had held up the BTIA because they have strength similar to India. They're a service economy. And they also, as you would recall, that just before Diwali also that was articulated, unfortunately, they had some suspicions about the mobility, which is part of any FTA, it's part of WTO regulations, and they have problems with allowing equal mobility between the two trading partners. So under those circumstances, we have to carefully look with whom we have had agreements in the past, and you thoughtfully put it up on the screen. We've had agreements in the past with groups of countries or countries who have either been willing to make the necessary adjustments or who have strengths which we don't have, and we have strengths they don't have, etc.
Sure.
This is going to be much more tricky for us because, as you rightly point out, we have to make sure that when we do this FTA with the UK, we benefit as much as they do, because they will really benefit with an FTA.
Access to our markets.
Post Brexit, they are outside the protection of the European Union trade agreement. So, and it hasn't really worked out the way the Brits who were pro-Brexit thought it would, in the sense that they thought that the world would rush to make FTAs with UK. It didn't quite work out the way they thought it would.
Right.
Of course, they had not anticipated COVID, but still they will really gain from an FTA with us. All the more reason that we need to be very circumspect and see how we proceed.
Indeed. Professor Das, to what extent is the global economic environment beneficial to India's trading options currently? Does India need to rebalance trade? Because if imports are more than exports, then of course, is there room going to be to renegotiate once a deal is made?
Thank you, Mark, for having me on your program. You've raised a very valid question. The external environment at the global stage is not very favorable for India as well as most of the other countries. To give you just one example, the champion of free trade, United States, that has started looking inwards. If you look at a very important report of the White House of June last year, it said very clearly that focusing on economic efficiencies may not always work in the right direction. And there is a need for countries to have some sort of a self-sufficiency in some critical products. So given that background, given the reality of protests against globalization in the developed countries, the global landscape is indeed very, very challenging for India and for all other countries. And that makes the task of India much more difficult. For us, we have to secure market access abroad. We've been focusing in the current FTA negotiations on the developed country markets. But there is a huge opportunity awaiting us in Africa. That's an area maybe where we should also be spending some negotiating capital, building partnerships with African countries exploring the possibility of having mutually beneficial trading arrangements with African countries. So I think that should also be an important dimension where we could really benefit from when we talk of rebalancing trade. And let's not forget, in respect of most of our past FTAs, there's no doubt that our exports have grown to those partner countries. But at the same time, the imports have galloped faster.
Okay, so it's something that we have
the
to
reason is not very far to seek. But the short point remains that as far as our past experience of FTAs go, be it with ASEAN, be it with Japan, Korea, what we've seen is that because of the differential tariff structures of India and the partner countries, our imports have grown much faster than the exports.
So, Ambassador Mukherjee, how does a country balance the concerns of the domestic manufacturers if the FTAs are making imports cheaper, which seems inevitable in most times?
Well, earlier the mantra used to be that India needs FTAs in order to secure markets which other countries, competitors of India, have secured through FTAs. And so there was a lot of pressure put on Ministry of Commerce and Ministry of External Affairs to have a more judicious and open-minded approach. Some of us were told that we are too conservative, we look too much at the cons and not enough at the pros, etc. But now there is a much more balanced approach to FTAs, and certainly, as Dr. Das has pointed out, it has led to increase of trade. It has also led to increase of imports. There's no doubt about it. Now, in this particular case, if we have an FTA with UK, we have to understand in what way will it benefit us more than the existing trading arrangements which are under WTO rules. Because after Brexit, Britain is trading with the rest of the world without any trading agreements under FTA rules. So earlier, the British wanted to have a rather one-sided FTA with us, and this was, as I said, mentioned earlier, was rather unfortunately articulated a few days before Diwali. But now, with a different political dispensation, the British have to understand that we are a large economy, we are president of the G20, we have a lot to offer, and some pretty important countries have signed FTAs with us. So if they have signed FTAs with us and they are large economies, they must have done it because they are benefiting from it. So the British have to decide where the give and take happens. And in this particular case, Mark, it is also important to remember that India is a big investor in the UK, which is so ironical. Whether it's real estate or it's big British companies, etc., etc., we are into UK in a big way. Perhaps the FTA will help to bring back FDI flows from UK to India, and will perhaps help us to improve our R&D in niche areas of excellence for the Brits. But as I said, it has to be on equal terms. So they cannot say that, you know, we don't believe that we can give you free mobility, which is the standard thing in FTAs, because then it would mean that they are approaching the negotiations with us not on the basis of sovereign equality between states, but with colored lenses. We cannot accept that. And then, as you thoughtfully put up on the screen, there is this whole issue of social and labor dimension, which we do not permit to be put into FTAs. And that actually held up the FTA with the BTIA with the EU, because the European Parliament passed legislation which makes it compulsory for these kind of references to be put into future. So that is not something that is binding on UK.
So it's clearly not. It's not an agreement that's going to be rushed into, and both sides are seeing that also. March was supposed to be the deadline. Now, I mean, the extended deadline after it was earlier supposed to be Diwali. But it looks like negotiations will go on for some time. Professor Das, India didn't join the RCEP to help protect its manufacturing. How can this manufacturing sector be used now, because it has been protected, in some select markets? You did mention Africa. To what extent can we actually push our products there?
Mark, what we need to bear in mind is our ability to access markets abroad depend on two different factors. One, of course, is the external dimension, which gets addressed through FTAs or the WTO rules. The second, which is equally important, is the internal dimension, which determines the cost competitiveness of Indian products. We have to be realistic. We have to acknowledge that compared to many of the other countries, our manufacturing, for a variety of reasons, is really not cost competitive. These could be on account of infrastructural deficiencies, logistics costs.
Okay.
But here the point to be borne in mind is that the government has recognized this problem, and very important steps are being taken. For example, the new logistics policy or the PM Gati Shakti program. These initiatives will certainly help cut costs when it comes to Indian manufacturing. And that is what will really help make our manufacturing more competitive.
Okay.
That coupled with, let's say, lower tariffs in foreign markets, that is really the way forward for India when it wants to enhance its exports. If either of the two dimensions is missing, then maybe we would really face problems. So just to summarize, we need to enhance our cost competitiveness.
Okay.
And at the same time, we need to secure market access abroad through lowering of tariffs, addressing non-tariff barriers. When it comes to services, maybe getting some mutual recognition of qualifications.
So, Ambassador Mukherjee, do you see issues like, the complex rules of origin, lack of information, higher compliance costs, administrative delays causing problems for our exporters?
I think that this government under Prime Minister Modi, ever since it came to power, has taken steps in order to make India a much more friendly, user-friendly place for foreign trade, and has taken steps to dismantle some of the obstacles to free trade, which used to be pointed out by our trading partners. As a result, today, in fact, India is giving huge competition to China, and many big companies, Western companies, are moving out of China for geopolitical reasons and are looking to invest in India. And this is an excellent development, which is why, in my perspective, as Professor Das has summarized, you have the external environment and the internal environment. I believe that I would say that the external environment today is excellent for a successful FTA. We should take advantage of the external environment, which is suspicion of an aggressive China, China's behavior in South China Sea towards Taiwan, etc. And we should move forward quickly to secure markets because of the favorable external environment, while taking steps, as has been just pointed out by him, to dismantle some of the barriers to free trade, which have already been very effectively done by Prime Minister Modi's government. And every month we hear of new steps which are being taken to make India a much more business-friendly country. And that, while remembering we are a democracy, unlike the Chinese. And so when we take steps which are economically good for India, but which may not be perceived to be so by populist lobbies, for example, the farmers' agitation, reform of farm laws, we have to go by what our democracy tells us, which is why the reform process may take more time. But because it's through a democracy, through parliament, in the long run it will succeed much better than through an autocratic regime like China. Mark.
Indeed. Professor Das, how do FTAs promote investments? Because India is promoting a startup culture. Can the startups hope to benefit from FTAs, especially in services? Now, the services sector, access to overseas markets in services, you were talking about access to markets. How exactly can they achieve all this?
Mark, the important point to bear in mind is that each FTA has its own dynamics as far as investment goes. In our comprehensive economic cooperation agreement with Singapore, what we did see is considerable foreign investment from Singapore coming into India. not in manufacturing sector, but in the services sector. When it comes to the FTA with Korea and Japan, we have seen some foreign investments coming into India from those two countries, but they were mainly in those sectors where both these countries already had a presence in the Indian manufacturing scenario. So what can be the likely outcome of FTAs on investment is a bit difficult to guess. Okay. Let's also bear in mind that when it comes to manufacturing, India has attracted foreign investment, which is mainly in the nature of tariff jumping. Mm-hmm. That is what we saw in the automobile sector. That is what we've seen in the smartphone sector. We brought our tariffs down to zero in IT hardware. We barely got any foreign investment. Okay. So the link between investment and tariffs in the Indian context appears to be more, as I said, in terms of tariff jumping. And if we lower tariffs, then we cannot be assured that investments will come in. In fact, as we've seen in Australia, once Australia announced that it would be part of TPP and it would be lowering tariffs, the investments in automobile sector, just in a way, there was a flight of investment out of Australia. Okay. So we need to be mindful of that.
Yes, absolutely.
Coming to the services sector, yes, we have seen some investments in the services sector from Singapore. Whether our startups can benefit from foreign investments, very, very difficult to second guess at this juncture. Okay. But one area where the startups can benefit is really not directly from foreign investment, but startups in the digital sector can really benefit from what I would call sharing of data by the government with the startups. And that is one area where the FTAs could impose some constraint for us. So we need to be cognizant of a vast array of variables that end up affecting investment from foreign countries.
Ambassador Mukherjee, to make Indian manufacturers globally competitive, we need to strengthen the MSME segment, isn't it? And how effectively are the concerns of MSMEs addressed in FTAs? Because to a large extent, when they bring up their concerns, the FTA negotiations fail.
That's because there are differing definitions of MSMEs depending on who's your trading partner. Like the European Union's definition of MSME doesn't fit our definition. So there's an issue of definition. There's also an issue of the fact that maybe our industry at this point, in certain cases, needs some extra protection, and therefore what we often try in an FTA is to, if it's a trading partner who is more developed than us, in this case it's not the case if it's the UK, we try to say that we will give the concessions in a phased manner over a period of time. In other words, they would give the concessions now and we would give concessions over, let's say, 5, 7, 10 years as our industry is in a position to give those concessions. In this particular case, Mark, I would like to underline, we are discussing free trade agreements. Yes. We are not discussing investment agreements. Yeah. The reason why the one with the EU didn't work is because the free trade was linked with investment. Investment is very complex. Okay. In this particular case, we are discussing plain and simple free trade agreements. Okay. And again, as you put up on the screen, these free trade agreements have multiplied since the present government came to power. Yes. Because the present government is committed to free trade, opening up markets for India. We cannot live in an island. We have to learn to make some concessions. As I said earlier, it is difficult because sometimes these concessions are disputed by lobbies, populist lobbies. Mm-hmm. But we have to keep at it, because if India is to become competitive, if India is to become prosperous, much more prosperous than what it is now, then we have to secure markets. And unfortunately, the mantra these days for securing markets, whether we like it or not, is to have free trade agreements with preferred trading partners. Absolutely. And so we have to get used to this new way of doing business, even though I have to tell you that about 15 years ago, it was not a preferred option either in Ministry of Commerce or in any. But the thinking has changed in both the ministries. People do have more flexible approach to free trade agreement.
Okay, Professor Das, India has 13 FTAs and 6 PFAs. Have the recent FTAs made a great difference to volumes and direction of trade? How would you assess the success of them?
Mark, you raised a very contentious question. The jury is still out on this issue. If we just look at overall exports and import figures, then as I mentioned earlier, in respect of our FTAs with ASEAN, Japan, Korea, we have enhanced our exports, but imports have increased more. In other words, the balance of trade has become more adverse. Having said that, let me also give you the argument of the other side. The other side's argument is that, well, imports could help enhance the competitiveness of our manufacturing sector. Fair enough. If these imports are of, let's say, capital goods or raw materials, parts and components. Now, there is one very interesting fact which needs to be borne in mind.
Yes.
The classic textbook approach to FTAs is that if you lower tariffs through an FTA, then imports become cheaper. We actually did some very hard number crunching, and we found that after signing of an FTA with ASEAN, ASEAN exporters actually raised their prices to India. In other words,
yes,
the benefit of lower tariffs did not flow to the Indian importer, but the benefit of lower tariff was effectively pocketed by the ASEAN exporter. So to that extent, the price to the Indian importer might not really have dipped. So this is, to my mind, a very interesting conclusion that our research comes up with. And so, in a nutshell, it is very, very difficult to say whether our past FTAs have worked or not, because yes, export has increased, imports have increased much more, but then we really need to disaggregate what categories of products are the ones where imports have increased. Mark, let me take one more minute and let me reiterate a very, very important point made by Ambassador Bhashwati Mukherjee. The past FTAs that we've seen did not have social clauses. Now, this adds a whole new dimension to future FTAs that we are negotiating with UK and European Union. Now, these can act as very effective non-trade barriers to our exports. These can pose tremendous challenges to our domestic manufacturing. So when we talk of future FTAs and then FTAs that we are negotiating, this is the one elephant in the room which we have to treat with tremendous caution, and I'm sure our negotiators are doing that.
I'm sure they are doing it. A final word from you, Ambassador Mukherjee. It's all the time we have for this last question. India has some key advantages at the current time. India has a post-COVID economic strategy that's pushing our economy. We are the fastest growing amongst the big economies. G20 presidency at the current time. You know, can this impact our negotiations? Are we speaking from a position of strength?
Well, Mark, as I just said at an earlier TV program, India's moment has come. We have the G20 presidency. We are doing extremely well coming out of COVID, despite all the difficulties in getting our vaccine approved by WHO. We have shown that we have been able to overcome this pandemic. In our own way. We've also given the vaccine to developing countries and those who want it, and we are making an excellent post-COVID recovery. So I think the moment is there. The FTA with United Kingdom, in my perspective, will come through, Mark, because the political factors right now are pushing both sides towards the conclusion of the FTA. What I feel probably will happen is that they will reach a more limited agreement, which is where both sides agree on, and there are some issues which need to be thrashed out, whether it's mobility or it's freedom of data or it's these social clauses, which need a little more. I am not sure whether UK is bound by European Parliament legislation anymore.
Yes.
But could still do it on their own because
Sure.
they are very good at summonizing.
Okay.
So they could do that, but I don't think they are bound by it as
Sure.
the EU is.
I'm
But
afraid
they have to be very, very vigilant on it.
I'm afraid we've run out of time. I'd like to thank both our guests, Ambassador Basmati Mukherjee and Professor Abhijit Das, for enlightening us on this very important subject of how FTAs can rebalance our trade and the pros and cons of this discussion, which is quite a deep discussion. I hope you've benefited from it. Thanks very much once again for joining us. So in conclusion, let's just say this, that the SDG 17, it deals with partnerships to meet the Sustainable Development Goals, and global trade partnerships, they must promote one of the SDGs, which is decent work opportunities and economic growth. The environment also needs to be right for countries to pursue ambitious FTAs, but those deals should also respect what's called the natural environment, naturally. So most FTAs are designed to have promotional rather than penal clauses, and disputes should be resolved through consultations, social dialogue, reviews, and technical assistance and the like. The sanctions regime, these that are currently prevailing in the world are against the spirit of FTAs. Thanks very much for being with us. Namaskar.
Big ideas, big dreams, and big achievements. Meet and learn from successful startup founders. Watch StartupChampions 2.0.
हाय मॉम, फिर से शॉपिंग? बाबूजी, आपने इसे बिगाड़ के रखा।
लिमिट में करो तो कुछ बुरा नहीं होता है।
बिना लिमिट शॉपिंग करेगी आपके कार्ड पे ऐड ऑन जो है।
मैंने तो कार्ड पे लिमिट सेट कर दिया। अच्छा, इसके फायदे ये हैं कि रिस्क कम हो जाता है और अगर फ्रॉड भी हुआ तो तुरंत बैंक को बोल दीजिए, नुकसान कम।
दादू,
नेक्स्ट टाइम ये पिंक ड्रेस।
यू आर द लिमिट।
लिमिट तो सेट है। आरबीआई कहता है जानकार बनिए, सतर्क रहिए।
You will meet two startup champions from the agriculture industry.
Create millions of tons of fruits that come in the country. It's very, very important to have automation here so that the farmer can realize a better price.
So what's your business model? How do you make money?
Basically the rates provided by the FPO, the commodity that they are getting, the grade or the quality that they want, and also the quantity.
For the Grammic platform, we charge the farmer basis the transactions that they record on the SAP platform. At the same time, for the agribusinesses that they use FMS, that is FPO management system, they use, you can say that we have freemium type of model wherein we have a costing basis the tonnage that they procure through our platform.
Good evening, namaskar, and welcome to Express News with me, Deepika, your daily half-an-hour window that brings you quick and crisp 100 news and updates from the country and the world. Let's begin. Prime Minister Narendra Modi was accorded a warm welcome at the BJP Parliamentary Party meeting held in the Parliament House complex. Prime Minister Narendra Modi was felicitated by all the MPs of the party with thunderous applause. BJP President JP Nadda, Home Minister Amit Shah and Defence Minister Rajnath Singh felicitated the Prime Minister. State President of Gujarat C.R. Patil was also felicitated in the meeting. The party's strategy for the remaining days of the winter session of the Parliament was also discussed in the parliamentary meeting. Parliamentary Affairs Minister Prahlad Joshi said that Prime Minister gave credit for Gujarat's victory to state BJP unit, BJP national president and the party workers. Prime Minister Modi gave a clarion call to all MPs that G20 is not BJP or government's program but India's program and everyone should be involved. A presentation was given by Union Minister Ashwini Vaishnaw about how India has become the fastest growing economy and inflation is also under control. International Monetary Fund is of the view that India's G20 presidency can help solve the critical issue of food and energy crisis, climate finance and debt crisis in more than 70 low-income countries. Dr. Geeta Gopinath, first Deputy Managing Director, is in Bengaluru to participate in finance track of the G20 meeting, said that there are serious headwinds to growth in China. Dr. Geeta Gopinath, first Deputy Managing Director, IMF, said that this is very important year for the world and there are great expectations from India for global collaboration. Dr. Geeta Gopinath said that India's G20 presidency can help better debt resolution mechanism. Geeta Gopinath added that India's G20 presidency is pushing for what is really required for the global economy. National Energy Conservation Day was being celebrated across the country. An event was organized to celebrate National Energy Conservation Day at Vigyan Bhavan in New Delhi. President Draupadi Murmu attended the event as the chief guest. President launched EV travel portal at the function. She also felicitated the winners of National Energy Efficiency and Innovation Awards and National Painting Competition Awards. Rajya Sabha witnessed uproar by opposition over clash between Indian and Chinese troops in the Tawang sector of Arunachal Pradesh. The opposition demanded discussion over the issue. Pulling up the opposition MPs, Rajya Sabha Speaker Jagdeep Dhankar said the opposition was given opportunity on Tuesday to put for their side on the Tawang face-off. Opposition also disrupted proceedings of Lok Sabha over India-China clash in Arunachal Pradesh's Tawang. Lambasting the opposition, Lok Sabha Speaker Om Birla said that they should not create ruckus during the question hour daily. And moving on to business now, at close, the Sensex was up 145 points to stand at 62,678 and the Nifty was up 52 points to stand at 18,660. Rupee rises 15 paise to close at 82.45 against the US dollar. Gold prices dropped by 144 rupees to trade at 54,599 rupees per 10 gram. Silver prices appreciated by 38 rupees to trade at 68,813 rupees per kilogram. Global crude oil prices were broadly stable on Wednesday as bearish signals from data indicating a surprise build in the US crude inventories met forecast of oil demand rebounding over 2023 from OPEC and International Energy Agency. Addressing the Parliament today, Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman said that the wholesale inflation has come down to a 21-month low in November as the central government is constantly trying to bring down the inflation rate. Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman also said that the retail inflation has also come down to 5.88% in the month of November. US stocks rose on Tuesday after a surprisingly small consumer price increase buoyed optimism that the Federal Reserve could soon dial back its inflation-taming interest rate hikes, but concerns remain the central bank could stay aggressive. US President Joe Biden said inflation in the United States was coming down and things were headed in the right direction even as more work remained to be done. China is battling COVID-19. There were 50 severe and critical cases in hospitals in Beijing, most of whom have underlying health conditions, state news agency Xinhua reported late Tuesday. Residents in Hong Kong on Tuesday said they welcomed the government's decision to further loosen COVID-19 restrictions by scrapping a mandatory COVID-19 mobile application and ease movement control for international travelers. The US government agreed to pay Pfizer Inc. nearly $2 billion for an additional 3.7 million courses of its COVID-19 antiviral treatment Paxlovid, the company said in a statement. US scientists on Tuesday revealed a breakthrough on fusion energy that could one day help curb climate change if companies can scale up their technology to a commercial level in the coming decades. The U.S. Energy Department said scientists at the Lawrence Livermore National Lab in California on the 5th of December for the first time briefly achieved a net energy gain in a fusion experiment using lasers. The scientists focused a laser on a target of fuel to fuse two light atoms into a denser one, releasing the energy. U.S. President Joe Biden signed the Respect for Marriage Act into law on Tuesday at a jubilant celebration that featured U.S. singer performing True Colors. The new law provides federal recognition to same-sex marriages, a measure born out of concern that the Supreme Court could reverse its legal support of such relationships. The U.S. House of Representatives on Thursday gave final congressional approval to the legislation. The House of vote was 258 to 169, with all of the chambers of Democrats and 39 Republicans voting in favor. The 169 of the chambers Republicans voted against it and 1 voted present. Volodymyr Zelensky seeks urgent winter energy aid as Ukraine's allies gathered in Paris on Tuesday. He said that he needed at least 800 million euros in immediate winter aid as Russian forces target civilian infrastructure across the country. Some 70 countries and institutions worldwide pledged more than 1 billion euros in immediate aid to help Ukraine on Tuesday. The aid was pledged to help Ukraine to get through a harsh winter as Russian forces batter its energy grid and other critical civilian infrastructure. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky urged New Zealand to take leadership in working on ensuring environmental security that has been destroyed by the Russian attack on his country. New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern announced a further $1.94 million in humanitarian support for Ukraine as conflict enters the winter month. A video of exiled mayor of Melitopol, Ivan Fedorov, showed a damaged bridge outside the Russian-held town southeast of Ukraine. In the clip, a vehicle is seen driving onto the bridge before approaching a section which appears damaged and then reversing away. Members of Hospitalers, a Ukrainian volunteer medical battalion, held a memorial ceremony for a volunteer from Sweden who died near Bakhmut in eastern Ukraine. The 20-year-old man from the south of Sweden was killed in a collision with a combat vehicle during the evacuation of a wounded man from a front line near Bakhmut last week. The regional governor, Pavlo Kirilenko, said Russians attacked an industrial zone as well as buildings at the Donbas Technical and Management University. Latest shelling of Horilivka, 30 kilometers northeast of Donetsk, wounded 2 women whose house was partially destroyed. Russian-installed city mayor Ivan Prikhotko said that the area had come under Ukrainian fire. A recently paroled Indonesian militant who made explosive use in the 2002 Bali bombings apologized to the victims of the attack and their families. New Zealand passed a package of new anti-smoking laws on Tuesday that bans its youth from purchasing tobacco products. The legislation will also reduce the amount of nicotine allowed